Hi, I'm Ben Davies and I'm co-founder and COO of Hugosave. And these are my biggest lessons. Life is a paradox. A paradox is really a contradictory statement that perhaps seemingly holds true. So an example, less is more. Stability breeds instability. I know that I don't know everything. These are just some of the examples. I've spent my entire working career in financial markets, and there's a belief that you get what you want out of the market, and perhaps there's even a paradox in that itself. Primarily, it's really the market gets what it wants out of you is what I tend to find. Hyman Mink's actually came up with the phrase stability breeds instability. It was also a phrase very much used by George Soros, a very famous investor, who imbued it in something called reflexivity, which is sort of behavioral sort of economics and its engagement with markets. And what he talked about was how we can have seemingly these self-reinforcing behavior in markets, these equilibrium, when in fact actually the antecedents to instability or disequilibrium are in fact those equilibrium itself. Here are the rules, there are no rules. I think that you have to challenge the status quo at every moment. My comments about Minsk and George Soros was they were saying that whilst they're seemingly in the eye of the moment, what seems like fair value or an equilibrium, in fact is actually a very unstable environment that's about to tip into disequilibrium. And I think that often when I used to sit in meetings, and still do sit in meetings, and someone says to me, oh, you can't do that. And when they say something so emphatically, invariably that says very much a lot about them, perhaps in that moment, perhaps in their life. But what it unequivocally tells me is there's probably a way of doing something. And it took me a long time to realize that I needed to break a lot of societal norms about what I perceived as the rules and when it was okay to break those rules. And after all, what are rules? They've typically been enshrined through institutional frameworks, often based on religion. For example, you could be stoned for being an adulterer in one country, while in another you could be patted on the back for it. So rules are to be broken, know when to break the rules. Culture is nowhere and everywhere. Leading on from the thought process about rules, I think there's a debate that when society creates rules, it's creating a culture. Now, I think within business, culture absolutely has to be defined by the founders, and then it has to be carried on by people within that organization who help evolve it. But if you don't stand for something, typically you're going to lead a void, a vacuum, and we all know that energy tends to move into a void. So you might end up with a culture that isn't necessarily befitting or fitting, particularly of a business that you're involved in. So I've been involved in financial services for over 25 years. Now, consumer products particularly, you're entrusted as a fiduciary, for want of a better phrase, with looking after and protecting someone's money. There is a trust that has to be built, and you have to create security of thought with those individuals. So our own culture really, and the values that we define, in many ways must imbue that trust and security. So for me, culture that really gets the most out of people is one where we create a safe environment for people, where we empower them, where the stick, whilst it may work for a while, actually is really counterproductive. People ultimately want to feel a sense of belonging. And the best way to feel a sense of belonging, or to create a sense of belonging, is to create an environment where you want to turn up every day and be a part of. Fear nothing. Have the courage also to be fearful, though. I think greatest lesson actually I've learned in my own humble life is that the fear itself is probably one's greatest fear. And 90% of the time, those fears don't necessarily manifest, and it's wasted energy. I think that fear is something you can be comfortable with. Sometimes you should keep it close to you. If you think about it, it's innately built in us, in our amygdala. The standing on an edge of a cliff, 500 feet above the ocean with a sheer drop, it's right to be fearful. Is it courageous at that point to jump off? I would probably argue not. You're not going to survive. So I think you have to have the courage to be fearful, to know when you're hit with an obstacle, sometimes it's not smart or courageous to climb over the top, but it's actually to step back and work your way around it. But I'd also say that often at the greatest feeling of fear, at that ultimate moment, not necessarily when you're in physical danger, is often the moment you need to have the courage to step forward and take that leap of faith. No life has meaning, but all life has meaning. You have to create purpose in your life. You have to create a sense of belonging. I think this is probably best imbued in Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. It was about his time in a concentration camp during the Holocaust, and how he survived it, the life lessons he took out of that, which were manifest. It dictated the way he led the rest of his life. He became a psychoanalyst and came up with a theory embodied from that time. Some of the big lessons he witnessed were those who assigned a status in their everyday life around who they were as a job, what they meant to other people, typically had a sort of a veneer of self. And actually it was those who, beyond chance, who survived the camps was because they had an innate, or found an innate sense of who they were without that status. And I think that's really important, particularly when you're in the financial world. It's very easy to get lost in the extrinsic value of money and wealth, particularly as it's a scorecard often used to measure one's success, when in fact actually building a company is so much more. But obviously shareholders tend to invest in you and they want to see capital value appreciation. But for those of us who go along that journey, of course we want that capitalist outcome for all involved, but we also need to take those life lessons